Hi, my name's Pastor Eric, and if you listen to the Faith Over Breakfast podcast or Journey Companion Ministries podcast or the Healing the City podcast, you probably recognize my voice. And you probably recognize it as the intro to many of these, telling you all about how you can support us. We just want to say thanks for supporting us. Hope that you'll continue. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric and I am pastor of the Village Church in Tucson, Arizona. And across from me in the opulent studios at the Village Church is Andy Littleton, pastor of Mission Church.
The opulent studios.
The opulent studios.
French press coffee.
With French press coffee today. And we tried to have a little conversation about, what is it, All Souls?
We started with the All Souls All Souls event getting rained out and feelings about that, how to feel about that. We ended up, you could get a little thoughts on our churches and ways that people tend to travel through churches for different reasons in the middle, and then we get back to All Souls.
Yeah, and it's just really kind of how a pastor's conversation over coffee would be.
Which is what this is.
And I would like to say that it has become more and more that as you and I do it. This is exactly what I would talk to another pastor about.
Yeah. That
would be allowed to be heard on air. Because, we also talk about our churches and hard things and people we're praying for that can't be on air. But this is the general, this is the first hour of any conversation.
Yeah. We do frame the show from time to time. That is what it is. This is not a scripted. This isn't a teaching. This is two pastors sit down to have a breakfast table conversation. Look there's an empty seat. You're welcome to join us.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for the support and enjoy the podcast. Hello, Andy.
Well, you are dealing with the fact that I want to talk about All Souls, and you're a little bit apprehensive. Or no, that's the wrong word. You just don't think there's a whole lot to say.
That coffee's better than I thought it was. No,
is it?
There may be a lot. I'm just uninformed.
Well, it's okay. Yeah, Eric, thanks for the French press.
You're welcome.
This has taken me entirely by surprise. It's almost a real Faith Over Breakfast now.
It is.
Yeah.
If I had brought bagels or something, we would have been
but then I just ate, so that would have been a lot of food.
Yeah, because you would have had to been really hospitable and eaten the food that I had provided.
Yeah, no matter how it made me feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real hospitality. Well,
all right, so let's talk about this old souls.
Old souls. Okay, so the reason that I thought about this was years back, and I think you and I may have even been at a pastor's group that discussed it, actually. But years back, there was a pastor's group discussion about the All Souls event here, which is
we may have even talked about a little bit on our podcast.
We might have brought it onto the podcast, and so it's a big event in Tucson. There are religious and Catholic layers to it. There's a lot of cultural layers to it. It's just become a very well-known thing. People travel here, and one of the things. Ooh, don't sneeze, Andy. Okay, I'm good. One of the things that came up in the past was I had been at an event, a ministry event, where the Christians in the room had determined that it was a mostly evil or bad event. And we prayed, and it was in somewhat of a public space. I remember thinking how does this land with the servers and stuff like this? But we'd prayed that it would get rained out.
Okay.
Or I should say that was the suggested prayer.
Some people prayed that.
Some people prayed that it would get rained out. And I remember just at the time thinking I felt unsure about all that. This was years ago. Years ago.
Could you say nuanced about it?
Always. Isn't it annoying how nuanced? I wasn't sure. I wasn't positive that's what we should do. I wasn't sure. So this year, it pretty much got rained out. And I have our store is in the complex where everything culminates, where the big end of the event is. And I'd been watching for like 2 weeks the event people, and there's one especially who's there who's been very helpful to us for some of the events we've hosted, like Luminous and our Christmas Eve service we did there. And he does the Compline events that happen in the evening, but he had worked very, very hard to get this thing set up, and they set up a whole different stage. And I happen to know that he thinks he has a special place for the events that touch on deeper meaning, and All Souls would be one of them. And all the vendors and the stores and everybody were hoping that this was going to be a big,
good for
big day,
the
good
economy.
for business. And the people that traveled, hoping to take part in it. So I showed up on Monday, the day after, and everybody, people were cleaning up from the event that pretty much didn't happen, not nearly the way they expected it to. And there was just a lot of kind of sad people because it got rained out. And it flashed me back to that time that we'd been encouraged to pray for it to get rained out, and my struggle with how I felt about that. And I'm still back and forth on how to feel about all that. So I don't want to just talk about the event and what it means and what does it tie back to and the syncretism that's potentially there. But more, what should we wish upon people who are dabbling in the religious, but they don't do it the way we do it, and maybe even, dare I say, ways that we might think are wrong?
So
what should we wish for them? What?
Let's maybe, as you often talk to me about language, I don't know if it's about, my prayers are not wishes.
I agree. So yes, I think
you could flesh out what you mean by what
by wish we could you could imagine a genie and a wish, right?
Yeah.
And I think when I said wish, I'm thinking hope. Like, what do we hope would happen? And then when you are praying for something, you're actually calling upon God to act. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if we just took it from where probably the people were, and not to build into like exegeting All Souls, the celebration or the procession and all that it is. If you believe deeply that this is evil, would you not pray strongly against it and hope that God would act? Right. If you do, and I guess I
don't know how you can not exegete it at some level, because you were uneasy. You're willing to exegete people's actual response to it. So why are you uneasy about the prayer?
I think that part of what it was is, and just to be honest, like the line we draw of when a thing ends up being evil and ends up being like, when is it that there's evil in it and there's good in it, and when is it that a thing is full on evil and should be stopped? So we've had a big critique at Mission of putting up a Christmas tree. It's not a lot of people, but there are those who say this is a pagan practice, that this comes from a pagan practice, and there's evidence to that. And it's
pretty weak, but yeah.
Yeah, but there is. And my take on it is, okay, so historically that, sure, maybe there was a pagan practice with the tree, but we are in the redeeming business here, and you can use a Christmas tree to think about other things. It isn't either all bad or all good. It depends on what you do with it.
Sure.
Right. And so there's that. And then I think something like All Souls, I know one of my orientations is toward those who are, I guess I see this event as bringing a lot of people who aren't religious together, and they're thinking about eternity. They're thinking about God a little bit. And there's a part of me that goes, I would rather redirect that than pray for their demise. I would rather invite them into further reflection than pray that the event fail. And I'm unpacking this, which is why I wanted to talk about it today, is because there are lines here, and people feel, I think, oriented in, some people probably lean my direction, and probably other people lean more of the, if it isn't faithful Christianity, even within our culture, because mind you, we're not doing this in our church.
No.
If even within our culture, you should try to shut it down. I would feel differently if our church denomination said we're going to do also. I'd say no way. We can't. It is not what we believe. But for it to be happening in our city is a different thing. To me, it's like this is a Paul on Mars Hill moment. We can go, hey, you're looking at a spiritual world and God's. Let's talk about that. And I feel like if you take the adversarial, I hope it fails, that you close that door, you slam it.
So I would argue that this is the tension between the missionary and the church, established church. And we are now having a timeout.
Restroom.
Do 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 do. Doing extra work. Welcome back, Andy.
Oh, thanks. It's great. Great to be back. You were just about to say something really good, and I thought, I want to.
You want to?
I want to listen.
Full
well.
focused. Yeah.
Full
So we had to take that small break.
Yeah.
Small bathroom break. Yeah. Well, I don't even remember what we're talking about. Oh yes. Oh, so here's what we have: the two things. You have the church, and you have the mission wing of the church. And to use your Mars Hill example, we're talking about when Paul ends up in Athens in the book of Acts. I think Paul would be happy to end up in Athens without all those statues there.
Sure.
And I think you're thinking like a missionary, and that's good. I think missionaries then, as they reach people, those people end up in the community of God, and those people end up having to live out established lives, and part of that is deconstructing maybe, or speaking out against the things they see from maybe their previous life, or things so can the two function? Maybe that tension is supposed to be there. Maybe there's a group of people need to pray that it will stop, and another group of people need to go be missionaries to it.
Yeah, good. And I think actually, as you're describing that, it would feel one way if it was people who were like, I would do that. I have issues with it. That was me. I know it well. I have issues with it. That would be actually would feel better to me than it being more of like we are uncomfortable with this in our town or something. There's a line here that I'm trying to find for myself of what is it about just like, that's bad. You're de-Christianizing the town we want to Christianize. I hope it fails. Or somebody who's like, hey, I'm coming from there. I know the darkness in there, and I'm concerned, and I want to speak against it.
But can someone just be discerning?
Yeah.
And look at it and say that's probably not good. Mm-hmm. We should pray that it's not there.
Yeah.
I mean, you're uncomfortable, but is the uncomfortability because of the gospel, or just because you don't want people to know that other people want it to be shut down?
Yeah, it's not that I don't want people to know. It's like, it's the why. I think it's the sense of,
so you don't think their why is they think it's evil, brings darkness into the community, and therefore they wish it to not be there.
Yeah. There's probably a lot that I'm intuiting and inferring from my years of being in the Christian church. Okay?
Sure. Yeah, no, I got you.
But it felt less motivated by I hope that these people can see, or even there wasn't an acknowledgement of, okay, so these people are actually in this event potentially expressing a form of faith in God. Mm-hmm. These people in this event are expressing some form of a faith in life after death.
Yes.
While it may be, formed by Catholicism and other mysticisms that have been linked together with it, there is some common ground there. It felt like that part wasn't being acknowledged, that there were some common type, maybe even mistakes of the church that led this thing to exist in the way that exists now. Like maybe that, I would even say ways in which the Protestant church doesn't own its connectivity to the Catholic church, that we are coming from the same roots in some ways not, but in some ways we are. And so rather than going, well, that's a thing that we people who try to follow Jesus co-created that's doing that. It's this no, that's not us. That's not,
Well, Protestants protest, so we protest it.
Right. Yeah. I think those type of pieces, I think, weren't acknowledged. And then there didn't seem to be this curiosity. That probably is the missionary side of me that goes, oh, I wonder why is this event so big? Like, why is it that so many people, when you're supposed to, and I think at the core for a lot of them, there's a variety of feeling, but for a lot of people, it's remembering those who've died and hoping that they are with God. And then there's this idea of their what needs to be purified in them, and there's all this, there's the in between the two worlds stuff is where it gets really complicated. But yeah, less curiosity about that and going, how can we be conversant with that, and more of just I just wish it was gone.
Have you ever gone?
No, I do not. And so I am in the camp of, I do not feel comfortable celebrating it personally.
So if you were thinking about it as more missionary or missional, shouldn't you go?
I could absolutely go for that reason. Yeah. So it's not that I have not personally gotten to the place where I'm at that. And actually, I don't know if at the event would be the ideal time to have the conversation, or prior to or after it. The altar is always being built over by our store, and this is where people are setting up the things about their relatives. And I think that being in a conversation with people in those moments, even if you have a friend who's remembering a relative, to talk to them about that and say so what does it mean for you to participate in this? I also, by the way, think a lot of people just think it's cool and just want to be a part of something that
dress up.
You want to dress up.
Yeah.
Which is
and get drunk.
Yeah. Which is also what a lot of other Christians are doing on Halloween.
Yeah.
In a different way. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even really, really hardcore reformers who are dressing up like Martin Luther and getting drunk.
Really good Protestants.
That does happen. So, yeah. Anyway, the wrestling with this.
Yeah.
So, but I don't disagree with you that I think it's good in the same community to have people with the various orientation. In fact, I think it's better if you do have both pieces in tension and conversation on a lot of issues.
Right. I think part of it is the tension of the missionary church versus the established church, or the missionary versus just the church itself. And I think they both have to live in tension.
Don't you think that they often just separate from each other, and that's not always?
I think so. But I mean,
that's unfortunate.
It is. I mean, I think things. I don't know. I really don't know how that all works. I think that what I do understand is like when we planted the village, the data that people would throw around is like, well, it takes 3 people in a church plant to bring 1 person to Christ, where it takes 100 people in a church to bring 1 person to Christ in an established church.
Oh, okay.
So if you plant a church, you have this ability to grow quickly and with new Christians because it has one sort of missional mode built into it. And it doesn't have all of what you would call the structures of church that people have to maintain.
For sure.
And so that more energy can be put into people's neighborhoods and things like that. And I would argue as now, I still imagine ourselves as a church plant, right, even though we're 20 plus years old.
Yeah.
23 to be exact. Yeah, I can see now that the infrastructure within the village requires a lot of work.
Right.
And so when you begin to talk about what does it look like to be a missionary in your neighborhood, you're asking people to put more time into things and engage in new and different ways. And so, yeah, it takes a little bit more work for people to keep that mindset.
But in a way, just getting to your church still feeling like a church plant in a way, because you planted with that type of mission in mind, that's part of your story as the village. Whereas some churches were like, this town was built and we were the Methodist church in the town, so we built a church at the town square. And if that's your story, it's harder to kind of tell a new story versus the village was always I mean you were meeting in the Muse and the art gallery, and there's still that DNA is still there.
So here's an interesting, I think I have enough anecdotal evidence for this, but over 20 some years, and this happened more while we were really trying to grow as a church plant. There's 25 of us, 30. People would. I noticed there's this pattern that people would come to Christ in the Assemblies of God or the Pentecostal movement, and they would last there for about 3 years. Yeah, and then they would move to the Baptist church, and that Baptist church would establish them in their faith. Give them the basics and it still was close enough to their Pentecostal roots at the transition. And then they would find 10 years into their faith, they would find this moment where they kind of were disillusioned with everything, and they would run into Reformed teaching, right? And they would meet sort of this very rich and nuanced and well thought out historic system. And they would find, and so they'd end up as Presbyterians or any of the other kind of variations of Reformed, Lutheran, etc.
And then after that, they
might land in the village because they are disoriented from all of it. But I think that most of the time they just landed in the Reformed church and stayed there. And then wrestled with their kids who didn't want to stay in the Reformed church and wanted a more alive faith. Like that was,
and then the cycle cycle repeats.
Yeah, but I think
I've seen versions of that.
Yeah, they're versions. But what I found is, especially like the Pentecostal community, Assemblies of God community, they really did a great job of drawing in people and seeing real, true life conversion from darkness to light. But they struggled to maintain that because they were drawing in enough. And people have, you become a Christian, your life still, right? You're now maturing to get back to, you have to mature. And they struggle to do that in an effective way, partly, I think, because of their theology it doesn't necessarily lend itself to maturity. And I know it's very broad.
The experiential tends
wealth. Health kind of,
well, depending on your wing of Pentecostal.
Yeah, but I mean, let's just say the generalized Pentecostal, and where the Baptist kind of pushed that aside and gives a very Bible-based, Bible-centric kind of faith, basics of the faith, all that kind of stuff.
I push back on the Pentecostals because I think that it was more about experiencing the Spirit and potentially something like a physical or spiritual healing experience. And then later, due to, like the influence of kind of the mind sciences and stuff like that, there was a movement into health, wealth, and prosperity that especially happened in the Pentecostal church, but its earlier roots weren't engaging that so much.
Right.
And so there are older versions of the tradition that never did do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But both have the same appeal to some degree. Something you could see a very tangible life change.
Yeah.
Like that
Mm-hmm.
felt like immediate, and people were witnessing to that. And then you go to a Baptist church and maybe you're not so much hearing that, but you're going to have a really like a Sunday school game plan to learn all the things.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, so if you look at American like history and the way that the gospel moved through the United States, the Reformed, so Calvinists and Lutherans were very European, and they brought European church and established European church, whereas the Baptist movement was low church and the Pentecostals
came more from the peasant class of,
and they had missionaries
pilgrims.
and traveling pastors, and so there was a lot of missionary work that came out of those two spaces, and so that's what converted a lot of the U.S., and especially in the West, right? Because once the Bible colleges started and women started becoming, circuit preachers and all that kind of stuff. So there's, but I just noticed it's very interesting that that's what happens. And I think my point being is that the church is trying to wrestle with what it does with people who come in who are new to the faith, and they're trying to get them established and pull them out of their life that's chaotic, right, of their pagan life. You see this in Paul, where Paul's trying to like balance the being a missionary and culture, and at the same time helping create a community that's safe and is not being syncretized with its culture.
So if you were the Pope of Tucson, the Protestant Pope.
I am the Protestant Pope.
You would send the Pentecostals to throw a party, a healing party next to All Souls, and give a counter experience, and then after 3 years, you would move them over to the Baptist churches to do Sunday school, and then after that, you would move them into the Reformed church
to get some church history and some systematic theology,
and boot their kids back out to the Pentecostals.
Yeah. There you go.
That's how you would.
Yeah. No, I think honestly, what I'd probably do is, if I were the Pope, I would get together. I would command the pastors of all of these communities to get together and to figure out how they can create a more holistic way of following Jesus together.
Yeah,
because I think that's what the younger generations really hope for within the church, and I think outside is to experience the fullness of faith, to experience the Spirit, to have physical, tangible experiences, to have well-rooted historic theology, to know how to study the Bible on their own and gain insight and direction.
Yeah, I do. Interesting direction we've gone here with All Souls, but it is interesting. Just to tack on to that this is just always true. Churches have specialties, and there's often this desire that each church is going to do all the things, and I just don't think they can, because there's going to be a leader or two, especially that have an angle on things. So for you, there's growing up in the home of counselors, and also and having a deep desire to see discipleship done well in the church. Like that's been in you for a long time. It's the Village is good at that, especially good at it. Other churches can grow from that, but the idea that other churches are going to do it as well as the Village, I don't know. I don't know if they will. because they don't have your story.
It is interesting to me that people think that I'm big on discipleship. It's really hilarious. Because it's not necessarily a high value of mine.
Nice.
And
well, that's
really interesting. Because all of the village is designed to be missional. Like every aspect of it. That's where my heart was. But then it didn't happen that way. I mean, it did. Like lots of people became Christians and got discipled. But yes, because of my background in counseling. Not just my parents, my own education and all that kind of stuff. Life experiences.
Well, that stuff, it does shape you. And I think that in my, I could look at some of my own, background and journey and early experiences and so on. So there's our church, like I do give it a lot of DNA. Mike does. Others, like, especially do. And it's always going to, at least while we're around, going to have an emphasis. And I think one of our emphases has to do with kind of like that middle space between meeting people, presenting faith and a community in a different way. Also like presenting the church in a different way. And I, like, for me, so you grew up in the home of counselors. I did not. I grew up in the home of, dad is a laborer, mom was more educated business owner, and then, she did more clerical work later. But they both worked in secular spaces. I, as an only child, actually spent a lot of time in both of their workplaces, seeing how they engaged as Christians in their workplace. One of them blue collar, one of them white collar, and then lived in a more impoverished community early, but then went to school in a wealthy Christian school. And there's always been a lot of translating to me, like the nuance, having to go back and forth between worlds and help them make sense to one another. That's a theme of my entire life.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because I think you guys like to talk about being an outpost, but you tend to wrestle with more conservative ideas.
Okay.
Like the Christmas tree.
Well, it's funny because I think we tend to get people around who are wrestling with what does it mean to be between the two worlds. So we end up having those conversations more.
Right. I mean, I think we just put up a Christmas tree and no one's ever saying we have. No one doesn't. No one says anything. It's just like, oh, it's a cool Christmas tree. Yeah. Right. So there's, you guys are wrestling with that more nuance. I think for us, it's just like that's how you would welcome someone.
We actually have, we have a number of people around who Christianity was not their background at all, but we have probably just as many who grew up in some form of a cult.
Sure.
And that's actually, there's a lot of strict thinking in that world. And I can think of 4 or 5 people who have that sort of journey, and there's a lot more like worry about either doing it the way the cult did it or in a way like struggling that, well, the cult was kind of onto something.
Yeah. Well, and I think like what's interesting to me is that we try as pastors to tell a story. Right. I mean, especially as missionary pastors, like what we are, that's like part of the key to welcoming people into a community is trying to tell the story of the community, tell its values, emphasize things. But what's interesting to me is that the community will not necessarily, it will come around and resonate with it even when it's not the story. Right. And it's not the actual story of the community, which is kind of interesting to me, is that that's at the village, it's at mission. It's who's going to walk in the door and say, oh yeah, this is actually a place where I could find Jesus and connect. It's not like necessarily the person you thought you were going to be reaching.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there are the people that I assume, actually I remember when I planted, there were people I knew who I was like, I think they will like this church. And to this day, none of them are there. Yeah. None of them, maybe a couple of them tried it once or something, but none of them are there. The people who are there actually very much are the type of people I imagined, but not the ones. Yeah. But then there are some that I never would have guessed.
Yeah, I mean, one of
Never would've guessed it.
my best friend in high school, who I then led to Christ, and he, went away, but then he moved back into town, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I don't know how long it was. But I was like, he's going to love the village.
Yeah.
And he came once, and he didn't like it,
Yeah.
and his wife didn't like it.
Yeah.
And probably he would have stayed if he were single because of me, but, and his kid didn't really carry the way.
Yeah.
And so they didn't stay.
Yeah.
They just visited once. And I was like, but they lived in town. I'm like, this is weird to me. Like, this is the church I, created for someone like you. Like, this is what I was hoping you'd find a place in a home. And it's just the way things are and the way people experience what you're doing. You don't get to decide that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're still trying to tell that story.
Yeah.
And I think, like, what's funny is that, like, when you say we're an outpost church or whatever, and, people inside the church experience it one way, and then people looking in experience it one way. And it's the same at the village. When we say we're creative or we're missional or whatever it is how we tell our story, people, you just don't you get to just, like, it. The experience is different.
Well, creative is one that as we were talking, that's one of our values too. It looks very different at Mission versus the village.
Yeah.
And I've heard feedback on it from a couple people recently, mostly positive, that what I like is the creativity. And then, Mark came and talked at our pastors group and talked about what the creativity looks like here, which I love. And one of the things he said was there's this idea that you're all creative, and so we're going to express that. Mm-hmm. And I think the way I had heard it most recently at Mission was somebody was like, I like that you make space for creative people, and in a way, like, it would be like the more refined editions of that get to have space.
Yeah.
I know we have a number of people who are musicians who feel, I've heard this several times, that they've said at every other church they always ask me to play. It's nice to be at a church where we've got somebody like Mike to where I don't have to play. I can just go and just be a part, and I don't have to be a musician right now. Other people feel the opposite. Other people want to be involved. But I'm just saying that somebody can hear that word creative, resonate with it, and expect very different things as a result, right? Yeah. And same with the word discipleship. Like, I think that there are certain people who my way of kind of doing Christian ministry probably does resonate, and they want to be around that. And my best mode of discipleship is just like, come with me and do what I'm doing with me. Like, that's more than like, here's the training sessions, and there's probably people who are like, yeah, that's happening. And then I know there are people who are like, this is not discipleship. This is just categorically not.
Well, and I mean, I think what you're, again, I would say yes and no. I mean, and here's where we're more nuanced. But I think part of it is, that is the size of your church and the way it's shaped, and all, that is what discipleship is. It was what it was at the village. In fact, it was funny in our last leadership meeting, we were talking about how frustrating it is for some people that our discipleship isn't more structured.
Right.
And how exciting it has been that it has gotten a little bit more structured than it is. So people know what they're doing. Because the bigger you get, all of a sudden you have to begin to train people.
And when you entrust something to somebody else, and then, I know, I'm sure you and I have both experienced this, where you entrust a thing to another person, and then you're looking at it, you're like, that's not quite, you're doing something, but that's not what we do quite. And so then you have to go, I have to transmit this. I have to communicate this better.
Right. Well, and I think both, in some ways, when I look at Mission, and now we're just self-talking, but we'll do it anyway. When I look at Mission Church and the Village, I think they're both a critique against the same thing, but from two different ways of doing it. You guys tend to be more, especially if we just think about creativity in response to the way the church operates. When we say church, we're talking about just the larger community of God. Like, you guys tend to be more curated. and so you're looking to curate a particular experience. So when I go to your church, I feel like my experience is being curated, and it has been well thought out, like why we do what we do and why we say. And now, I would say that the Village also curates something, but it's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah.
But so you guys kind of took we're going to respond and be a little bit more high. And I don't mean this in the way it sounds, high church. And we said, okay, well, we're going to be more folksy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the difference between going out to the Village and the hamlet, and you're out there and everybody's got a guitar and everyone's singing. There's people jugglers over there and there's sword swallowers. And you guys are kind of a church Renaissance festival. We are. Yeah. No, we are.
That's actually sort of true.
It's intentional.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's part of, like, as you heard from, it's part of the discipleship.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
and we're more like an event downtown, like like it doesn't feel like over churchy, but it still is like we've got the person leading has prepared, and there's like, you said like there's
and I would say what's interesting is
an artist has done something, but it's not like
and I would say, though this isn't intentional, I would say that where we're similar is that in the value systems is like maybe where you look at kind of your music and stuff is equivalent to our cooking.
Yeah.
So for us, cooking is the thing that we have, like, people are really good at it.
If people showed up with a bunch of Hot Pockets, you'd probably like talk to them and be like, hey, let's
not do Hot Pockets.
Yeah.
But it drew lots of really good cooks who like to cook and like to do that. And so the majority of the time you can end up getting high-end steaks at our, if you show up enough at the Village, and you're going to get very creative different meals. So, and it's by one person, which when I experience, say, for instance, your worship and stuff, it's mostly Mike. Yeah, it's people around him, but it's a curated, it's the thing.
Yeah.
When I listen to your sermons, they tend to feel like they're being curated to the community, and in a way, like it's a piece of art, because you're a writer, so your sermons sound more like a writer. So it's curated, like I like that experience. So you're right, it's like an event. You go down, but you would get that more at the Village from the food, and then everything else is a little bit more.
And there's elements of what we do that probably feels a lot more like loose. I mean, actually, I could say right at this point, if you bring kids, we don't have this structure for kids. It's like there things.
Well, and kids were always a high value at the Village, so there's always, even when we had 4, always something pretty well structured for them.
And I think that's actually an area we're realizing part of our growth and change is like, we gotta invest in this a little more. We got more people with kids, and we had been there pre-COVID, then it changed again, and we're having to relook at that. Anyway,
it was interesting. But this kind of touches on a little bit on the maturity. Maybe it doesn't give that. We had a question about how to grow.
I want to give that a whole podcast,
but we're going to give it a whole podcast.
I do, yeah. But I think anyway, the whole All Souls thing, to bring that back in for a second.
Sorry about that.
I'll just say what I found myself feeling, and I think it's part of my, you could say it's the missionary tendency in me, is when I showed up and the just seeing like the fellow business people who I am, of which I am one, and I understand, and the thing about the people that worked so hard, I was sad it got rained out, and it reminded me of that time, the prayer that it would get rained out.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sad about the viewpoint embedded in the kind of the thing that happens between two worlds. That wasn't it. It was all the other stuff where.
Did you feel like it was a little political? Like it has a little bit of that flavor, or
what do you mean? The previous when the prayer about the rain. Political. I don't know. Not necessarily. No. Okay. It felt like it was maybe more like a spiritual battle, like way of thinking about it. And I'm not against that. I think that, I guess for me, it's like how it's done. Like, I think maybe I'm a little more like maybe that was like a drone strike version of spiritual warfare. Like, we from over here are going to pray that God from a distance without any of us involved just, knocks out your event. And I'm a little more inclined to go, I would rather see the spiritual contest happen in relationships with people who would go, who are wrestling with their spiritual ideas. And I would rather see light break in and for them to have a hope in the gospel, rather than just get their event canceled, which I don't think would change anything. Like, I think the rain out, all it did was bum people out. It didn't know. I don't think none of the people I encountered were like, you know what I'm wondering? I'm wondering if like the true gospel of Jesus Christ means that we can be secure in our salvation, and there's nothing that a person who has died doesn't have to do any more work because of the finished work of the cross. Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. They weren't. They were just like, oh, the event just got destroyed and all our work, right? Yeah. And I would rather be in relationship with people who were like, I hope that my grandma is with Jesus, and I'd rather go, wow, like, what's led you to hope that? Tell me about your grandma. Like, oh, have you, if Christ has truly risen from the dead, like, that's a profound change. And did your grandma take hold of that? Have you? What does that mean to you? I'd rather be in it.
Right. So this is like, okay, I get you, but let me just push back on you just slightly, because that's a very missionary way to think. But the other thing is, it's not that, okay, even the person who's praying for it to stop wouldn't be thinking that. What they would be thinking is all the dark forces that were called up because of this march didn't get called up, and they aren't moving around and infiltrating the community. And so the people who marched in that called up the dark forces, had those dark forces linked to them, and then they went to work the next day. That didn't happen, and darkness didn't spread through the city.
And I guess I'm
just saying that's why they're praying.
No, I know what you mean. And I think, like, I guess I don't want to, I'm not ready to say that none of that is true. My growing up Pentecostal, as we've referred to earlier, I've got my little alarm bells that go like, is that how it works? But there's a part of me that also goes, yeah, I think all the darkness is still super active. But did it get like dust, like dust that blows throughout our city? Did it get tamped down a little bit by the rain? Did it get knocked down? I don't know, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think there's a particular reason that we're encouraged to pray for the peace of the city. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think if you believe that that's a disruptive event to the peace of the city, then you pray for it to not happen.
Yeah.
I think you're thinking like a missionary, and I think actually both are workable. I think you pray for it to end, and you go be a missionary in it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the way you look at, I mean, not to bring it back to our last podcast on politics. You pray for a particular thing, you vote in a particular way, and then you go be a missionary in the situation with which God has called you into.
Whatever happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think maybe you can do both. Maybe you can go and pray that God shuts it all down, and then you go be a missionary at it.
Yeah. That's yeah. I have yet to pray that God shuts it all down. But
I'll be the guy who prays for you.
Yeah.
For you, so we can do it. So we could be two sides or one side of each.
But I would. But would I prefer? I would that there be an event that was, just a hope in the resurrection. I would.
Sure.
That would be my preference.
Yeah.
I'd rather it be that. Yeah. That where people came from all over the world to join a march that was not just about drinking and dressing up, and was and believed with a solid hope that because Christ is raised from the dead, that we have great hope. I wish that was the march. I wish that was the party. Yeah.
And I hate to keep going on the nuance thing, but I actually think you're right. if the prayer is rain this out.
Mm-hmm.
I think the prayer should be, God, this is a distortion of what is true
Redeem
and good.
it.
Can you redeem it? I pray for the missionaries who are headed to it.
Yeah.
Would you protect them, shut down the things that are evil, lift up the things that are good?
That's
a more nuanced
that prayer, and I think I would have felt very different about it. Even in the moment where it would have been like, that's acknowledging there's a complex story to this.
And as Pope of the Protestant Church in Tucson, that would be the prayer that I would ask all the churches to pray.
And with that, we conclude.
Okay. We love you guys, and we are hopefully you've made it all the way through to the end of this podcast.
To me, this is the one that had them glued,
yes,
Eric. This is
they were excited.
I think if they got through the denominational musings in the middle.
Yeah, if they can get through us talking about our churches.
Yeah.
We love our churches, by the way. That's why we talk about them. We can't stop. It's our life. And we care deeply about the people who go to them, and we want them to find Jesus and love Jesus, and we try to do it in very unique and different ways.
Yep, and we're passionate about it.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. So it just infiltrates everything.
We can't stop.
Can't help ourselves.
Well, thanks for tuning in. You can always send us a question for those of you who have, and we have a couple now in the queue. We thank you. We'll be talking about them soon. Keep them coming. We do this almost every week, so keep sending things along.
It's kind of funny. We cancel a lot, and I think we're probably still going to hit about 40 episodes this year. So it's pretty good.
And thanks to those, I've heard a couple encouraging words lately also. So thank you to those who have gone out of their way to say they appreciate it or they've listened for a long time. Thank you. That means a ton. I know. We also want to thank those who support with some kind of monetary gift. And I also would thank those who've supported by giving a rating or sharing an episode. That makes a huge difference. So keep it up. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.